Hi guys, so I finished California and oh man, I finished this like 2 days ago and I haven't made a video about it until today because I needed to like process everything about this book before I made the final video talking about it. I have to be completely honest and admit that when I finished the book I left feeling slightly unsatisfied by what had happened, and I was thinking about it because I wanted to be able to articulate why I felt unsatisfied, and I think the main reason is just I have so many questions about this world still. Especially that final chapter, or the final like 2 chapters where Frida and Cal end up leaving the land and going to the Pines, and I just have so many questions. Like, is the group still actively functioning then? Are they still planning on blowing up part of the Pines to, you know, shake things up? Like, I know they mentioned how Cal's going to be kind of like an inside man for Micah while he's in there, but is that all still happening, or is Cal just trying to do whatever he can that would be best for his potential child that's coming? I was partially correct in thinking that Toni would play some sort of part, that she was at the Pines and she had something to do with all of this, but I'm really sad that we don't really get much of Toni, even though she's just mentioned, but it talks about her in just sort of like this far away sense, like they just make mentions of her. She doesn't actually show up again in the book, which I was slightly disappointed about. If Edan Lepucki wants to write an entire book that's like a parallel storyline that's completely told from Toni's perspective, I would 1000% buy that book like today. And like I said, I've been thinking about this book a lot, and I've been thinking about the way that I felt about this book, and I came to like 2 conclusions. The first question I was sort of asking myself was basically, why was I unsatisfied? And I felt like the answer to that question is mainly just I wanted things to be wrapped up nicely, which is something that's weird for me to say, but I feel like because this world is so close to our world, I want to know what's going to happen because this almost feels like it's inevitable, and I want to know how things are going to turn out because it would make me feel better. But at the same time, this isn't a book that's meant to make you feel better. I feel like it's one of those books where you're supposed to feel slightly unsettled and slightly worried about the things that take place and about what could potentially happen, and you shouldn't feel like super happy about what's going on in this world. The second thing that I kind of thought about, or sort of came to a conclusion about, is that it reminds me a lot of Fahrenheit 451. The conclusion of that book, which I won't really talk about in case there are people out there who haven't read it yet, reminds me a lot of the conclusion in this book, in the sense that you sort of see the direction that the characters are going towards, but you don't really know how things are going to turn out. And you know, Fahrenheit 451 is honestly one of my all-time favorite books, so comparing this to that book is definitely a compliment. And I feel like faulting this book for that sort of open-ended ending isn't necessarily fair to the book, because sometimes stories are open-ended like that. Like, I know a lot of people like sort of like nicely tied up endings, or, you know, really likable, relatable characters, but everything about this book kind of goes against that. Like, the characters in this book aren't necessarily likable, like they're actually quite irritating a lot of the time. The events in this book are quite unsettling. So I feel like to put a nice neat bow on this book wouldn't really work for this book either. And I was thinking about the other dystopians that I've read, and I feel like there's either 3 potential endings for all dystopians. 1, it's really depressing and like everyone dies or is left in this really hopeless state. 2 is the really open-ended one, and then the 3rd one is where it's all wrapped up nicely in a bow, and I feel like the ones that are wrapped up nicely in a bow are the ones that I actually hate the most. So I feel like saying that it left me feeling unsettled or it left me wanting more isn't necessarily a bad thing, and might have been what she was going for with this book. I feel like there could easily be a sequel to this book, you know, following Cal and Frida in the Pines and just sort of how their life goes after their kid is born, especially if Cal is still working with Micah. I feel like there's a lot that still could be explored with Micah and his relationships, and I feel like a lot of the stuff that they started bringing up towards the end of the book really lends to sort of like the conspiracy theorist side of my brain, where you're just thinking about, or I was just thinking about, how Micah is working with all these different groups and he's really controlling everything that's going on, and he's sort of manipulating different people and telling people certain things in order to get them to just work together and work for somehow his benefit. Like, I feel like Micah's thing is just he just wants to be in control, and so I feel like he's manipulating all these different situations and working with more people than we realize, especially they hint to that, like he's working with the pirates and things like that, which completely makes sense to me, and I could easily see that being turned into a sequel. I don't know if she's gonna end up writing a sequel, but I would definitely read it. I don't know, I mean, I really like this book. I feel like it made me think a lot, and I could easily see like a classroom discussing this and just really dissecting this book and talking about all the different themes and ideas that are brought up. I think this book might be disappointing to some people because it's not a traditional dystopia. It doesn't make like huge social commentaries or anything like George Orwell did or anything like that. I feel like it's more about relationships and more about the people than it is about the world itself, although there are little hints and commentaries left here and there. It's not really about that. It's really more about the relationships, which I'm completely okay with because that's one of my favorite things to read about in books. But I could easily see people not being okay with that and wanting something different out of this book. But I mean, in the end, I really like this book. I'm really glad I read it. I do recommend it if you like dystopian books. I feel like this is one worth checking out. So yeah, I apologize if this video was kind of rambly and all over the place. Like I said, I feel like I'm still processing this book, and I feel like any book that leaves me thinking about it for days after I finish it is like a really good book, because books should do that. Or, you know, sometimes it's really good to have a book just sort of like sit, because I think it's really good when books just sort of like dwell within you and just like make you think about things a little bit differently, and that you don't just like speed through and then move on. Like, I feel like this is a book that you sort of need to sit back and just really think about the ideas that were presented in this book. So yeah, if you read California, feel free to leave your comments down below. I would love to hear what other people think about this book. I'm going to be basically all over the Reblog Book Club tag during this week as people finish up the book, and really interested to see what other people think about it, because I feel like this is going to be a book that's kind of decisive with people. So yeah, that's all I have for now. Thanks for watching.